Hello, and welcome to the Lost Archives. My name's Owen, and today we're going to do something a little bit different. Today we're going to brew some mead. So, mead is a very, very old drink. Traces of pottery found in China from 7000 BCE, before the Common Era. So we're talking 9,000 years ago, essentially. Have traces of chemicals that are consistent with those in mead, traces of honey and traces of the esters in mead. So it's a drink that humans have been drinking and fermenting for a very, very long time. Traditional, typical mead is pretty simple. It's only 3 ingredients: honey, water, and yeast. And essentially what you do is you put the honey and the water in to make a must, a mixture of the two, and then you add yeast and let the yeast go nuts, ferment all of those sugars in the honey into alcohol, and then enjoy. Now, mead, for the last sort of couple of hundred years before the industrial era, was used to kind of make water drinkable during the Middle Ages and the Viking occupation of England, which is sort of when mead became very, very popular and kind of is the romanticized era in which people think of when they think of mead. Potable drinking water was somewhat hard to come by, but you could somewhat sterilize water by letting yeast have a go at it and turn it into alcohol, or parts of it into alcohol. So a lot of the traditional older meads are quite weak, there's not a lot of alcohol in them, and they would have been fermented not for very long. Ours, however, is going to be fermented for a little bit longer. We want to maximize taste. Obviously, drinking water is not too hard to come by, so we want to make sure that our mead tastes really nice. The recipe that I'm going to be using today is not quite that old. It's an adapted recipe from City Steading, and I'm going to put a link in the description down to their video on YouTube. I thoroughly recommend checking out their content. They do a lot of really cool brews, a lot of different variations of mead, and we're doing a variation of one of their meads today called a Metheglin, which is actually an old Welsh word that kind of roughly translates to medicine mead. The combination of herbs and spices that we're adding aren't traditional medicines as we would think of them, but back during this time period, this is how people treated problems. They would often use these and see these as medicinal. I can't speak too much to its efficacy. I'll give it a shot and I'll let you know how great I feel afterwards, but I don't think it's going to be particularly medicinal. Essentially what we're going to be doing is making a traditional mead base, and then we're going to add in a whole bunch of spices. Now, the spices I've chosen to add were recommended by City Steading with their spiced Metheglin. So we're going to be adding in some cloves, some allspice, a little bit of orange peel, cinnamon stick, and that's the main stuff that we're going to be focusing on today. I am going to be doing a few more of these. I'm going to make 10 litres today. We've got 2 5-litre demijohns, which I'm going to fill up with honey. I've got 3 kilos of orange blossom honey. I've chosen the orange blossom honey just because it is a little bit more subtle. There's not a strong flavour to it, but I am going to start to experiment. If this all goes well, I'm planning on trying out some different versions of mead, including I'm going to try and have a bit of a go at some of my own. There's a lot of really, really nice Australian honeys that you can get. Things like leatherbark and yellowbox, which I reckon would make a really nice mead. Especially paired with some typical Australian herbs, things like lemon myrtle, for example. So I'm going to have a bit of a go in the future making some more out there meads, but I thought today we'd start off with something a little bit simple, a little bit straightforward. So I'm going to talk you through the process step by step. I've got everything ready to go, so let's get into it. The first thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that we have our 2 containers sterilized, and in fact everything sterilized. Now, I'm using Stellar San, which is essentially Star San. It's a no scrub foaming agent that also sterilizes, that you can actually leave the surface on. The yeast can actually can turn this into nutrients, so we don't have to worry too much about cleaning it off or rinsing it off too much, and it also just makes sure everything's sterilized. So we've got everything that we're going to be using, everything we're going to be touching has actually been sterilized inside a big red bucket full of water and sterilized solution, and I've just followed the back of the bottle to get the dilution quite right. So everything's been sterilized. We've got our honey here. Now, I've slightly heated up the honey before I pour it in. So as I pour the honey in, you'll see that it's not pouring too slowly, but it is still pretty slow despite the fact I've heated it up. Now, I've only very lightly heated it up. I didn't want to cook the honey at all. I didn't want to change its flavor in any way, which you can sometimes do if you heat it up. So I thought I'd just heat it up a little bit, get a little bit warm in a little warm bath so that it'll pour a bit easier. Now, I'm not being super precise with my honey measurements. I know that I've got 3 kilos of honey here, and that the recipe we're making here calls for 1.5-ish kilos in 5 litres, so we're pretty good to go here. We should be all sweet to rock and roll. And I'm also not going to be super precise with the water either. The reason for that is I am a little bit lazy, so hopefully everything's still okay. Once we've poured the honey in, I'm going to rinse out the container with some more warm water and pour that in so that we've got all of our honey in there. Next step is to give everything a solid shaking. We want to make sure that all of that delicious honey and water is mixed together and that the honey's not going to stick to the sides of our glass demijohns. So I'm giving this all a massive, massive shake right now. We're not too worried about oxygen getting into our mead at the moment. In fact, actually the oxygen getting into here is actually going to help the yeast in the early stages of production. Later on, however, we definitely want to be making sure this is an oxygen poor environment. We want to make sure it's an anaerobic environment for the mead. But at the moment, we don't need to worry too much. We can get lots of water in there, lots of oxygen in there. So give it a good old shake, all looking good. Now we're going to top up with the rest of the water. Fill it up most of the way. Fantastic. Alrighty, and the next step that we want to be doing is making sure that we take a reading. Now, I haven't added any of the spices yet, and I haven't added the yeast. I am going to quickly get an idea of how much sugar is in this mixture, as well as how much alcohol we're likely to create. Now, obviously, you can ferment the alcohol away to turn it into a much drier mead, but I'd like a little bit of a sweet mead because we're going to be adding all these spices and I want to make sure it still tastes really nice. So we're making sure that we have a little bit of sugar, but not too much that it's going to be overpowering sweetness. And we're taking a gravity reading here. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail with this now. I just was vaguely making sure it was roughly where I wanted it. When I do these in the future, or if I do these in the future and do them in a bit more detail, I'll be very specific with how much, with what our specific gravity is. But we're roughly getting to about 1.15 on each of these. Not too bad. So now that we've got all of our mead in and we've given it a good old shake, we can start to add our spices. Now, I have here our 2 cinnamon sticks, because obviously we're making 2 metheglins. We've got our allspice berries. Now I've got 6 for each ones because allspice berries are delicious and I think the allspice isn't going to be too overpowering. So we've got our allspice berries there. We're also going to add 2 cloves to each one as well. So I've got those handy. And then we've got our bitter orange peel, which is just some orange zest that I have dried that I've bought. Now the other thing that's chopped up in the corner here are raisins. Now we want to add the raisins for a couple of reasons. Firstly, we want to make sure that the yeast has a lot of nutrients. The yeast is going to be a bit hungry when it first starts off. We want to make sure it's got plenty of food that it can get eating before it starts turning things into alcohol. On top of that, the raisins are also going to act as a little bit of a stabilizing agent. They're going to help provide the yeast with nutrients and make sure that the brew ticks on without having too much problems with the yeast stalling and things like that. Now, also to help out the yeast, because we've got a few things in here which might muck around with the yeast and make it a bit sad, we've also got a mixture of dead yeast and boiling water. Now, I have taken some baker's yeast, which is just some baker's yeast I had lying around. I've added half a teaspoon for each bottle, so a full teaspoon there. And I've mixed it with some boiling water, given it a good old stir, and then boiled it a bit more. The reason is I've killed all this yeast. Why? I think this yeast could provide nutrients to the rest of the yeast. In fact, you can buy things called yeast hulls and fermento, which is essentially just dead yeast. Yeast are cannibals. They will happily consume dead yeast around them to help get them started. And because we're starting off with quite a small packet of yeast, I want to make sure they have a chance to build a good colony, make lots of delicious alcohol for us and make this taste delicious. So we're going to add in some of the dead yeast as well. Time to add the yeast. Now I am using Levelin 71B, because this was recommended very highly by a number of people on the internet, which is a place of truth and only truth. But more importantly, it is a wine yeast, typically used for sweeter wines, which means that hopefully it will survive the conditions of the mead quite well. And it's going to roughly produce alcohol up to around about 15–16%. This was also recommended in the City Steading Brews video, their Metheglin, which again, I've got down in the description. Definitely go and check out their video as well. So once we add that in, I'm going to add half a packet to each 5 litre because we don't need to add the full packet. We've given the yeast enough nutrients to hopefully get a big old colony started. We're going to chuck all of that in now and give everything a good shake to mix it round. I'm also going to stir it a bit too. Now that we've got everything in, I'm going to take my airlock and my bung. The bung and the airlock are to keep oxygen out once everything starts up. So I'm going to seal these on, and you'll see there's a little bit of water in the S-bend of this airlock. That is going to allow the carbon dioxide to escape, but not let anything nasty in. Because we've got perfect conditions for fermentation, it also means we've got perfect conditions for stuff to grow. We want to make sure that it's all ticking along nicely. We're not going to get any molds growing or any bacteria taking hold in the colony. So we're going to make sure that it's all safe in there. And to do that, we're going to put an airlock on, because I know everything's sterilized. I know it's not going to be a problem. So I've got that all on, and now we can watch it bubble away. Now at first, it's going to take a little bit of time for the yeast to start getting active, to divide, make a new colony, and also to start fermenting. So I'm going to come back in a little bit and we'll check out and have a quick look. Alrighty, we have action. Airlocks are bubbling. It's only been like 30 minutes, 40 minutes since I put the airlocks on and put this away, and already we can see some activity. Look at that. Oh my goodness. So it's already bubbling away quite nicely. This is fantastic news. I was worried that we were putting the yeast into a bit of a slightly difficult situation with all of these spices in here, and obviously honey is a little bit of a natural antibiotic as well, but hey, everything's looking great. So the trick now, every single day for the next 2 weeks, I'm going to give this a swirl to make sure everything's mixed up and make sure all those spices being mixed around, the yeast can get to everything. Once we've given it a swirl, I'm going to leave it be. Obviously, I'm not taking this airlock or bung off. I'm leaving them on. I want to keep it in an anaerobic environment from here on out. So yeah, for the next 2 weeks, I'm going to give it a bit of a swirl. Then I'm going to leave it for 2 weeks and not touch it. After that point, after it's been 4 weeks, 2 weeks of swirling, 2 weeks of not touching it, I think we should take a reading and take a taste test. And probably at that point, we're going to want to remove these spices. Now, that's going to be a little bit tricky. Obviously, we've got our raisins, which have been finely chopped, and we've got our orange peel. That's going to be a bit tricky to get out of the bottle, not to mention the cinnamon stick. So what I think I might do is actually, I might rack the mead into a new container. I'll be back and I'll film that, and that will be in a future video, and we'll also do a taste test and do a bit of reaction. And then after that, I think we'll leave it for a little bit longer, maybe for another 4 weeks. That'll be 2 months total time, and we'll come back and see how it's looking. So for the moment, let me know if you've enjoyed this. It's something very, very different, something that we've not really done before on the Lost Archives. So yeah, if you enjoyed this, chuck us a like. Let me know in the comment section below if there's any other things you'd like me to start making. I'm going to have a go at making a few other meads and some beers as well. Maybe have a go at some wines, some mellow mells. Have a bit of a play around, see what we can come up with. But yeah, for the moment, that's all. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the future. Farewell.